Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to my Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Thank you. Welcome to the party, pal. This is Fountainhead Forum 62. I have Mike ter Maat on. He is running for the office of president or the nomination of the Libertarian Party in 2024. He's long been an activist, and we're going to talk about his candidacy and some other things. How are you, Mike?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Chris. It's absolutely a joy to be with you.
Yeah, and this is usually my standard question to start off with. How did you become a libertarian? How did you get into all this?
Well, it's an evolution, isn't it? I started out on the Republican side of the world. I know most of your listeners probably started out as Republicans or Democrats. I grew up as a conservative economist. I started out in banking and believing in free markets and wanting to make the world work more efficiently. So I moved to Washington in my late 20s to go to graduate school. I had been in engineering and then an MBA student before I went into banking.
Yes. DC, right? Not the state.
That's right. Washington, D.C. The seat, Chris, the seat of all power. And so anyone who wants to make the world a better place would naturally go to Washington, right? So I went to Washington to go to graduate school. I got lucky in the sense that I went to a very pro-market, pro-free market type of graduate school program at the George Washington University. And that put me in good stead. Had a lot of great experiences in Washington. But one of the things that you learn in Washington is that it is not true, even if you're an aspiring and totally optimistic young economist in your 20s, it is not true that you are going to make the world a better place just by influencing economic policy in the federal government behemoth. It's That's not something that easily happens. So I quickly became disenchanted with the Republican Party through the 92 cycle. My boss's 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 boss is the one who said, read my lips, no new taxes, right? And then never mind his lips, we had new taxes, and he had agreed to some spending increases as well. And so that was a disappointment. I ran my own business in the 90s. I taught economics at a couple of universities, always from a free market perspective. I remember a buddy of mine in the 90s at a birthday party. I'll never forget the setting. He said, "You're a libertarian." And I said, "I don't say bad things about you. Why would you say such a mean thing to me?" And I continued to put it off and put it off. I did not register as a libertarian. I did not join the Libertarian Party until the 2000s. Later on, when I went into a second career, I became a police officer and worked as a cop for 11 and a half years on the road in Broward County, Florida, all as a registered libertarian during that time. So I think that while I came to libertarianism from the right side, as an economist, certainly it was around the time I registered as a member of the Libertarian Party that I had really developed an appreciation for what I might characterize as the left side as well, which is to say protecting your rights, whether the world works more efficiently or not. If the right side is all about making the world work better, allowing you to make better decisions because that's how you're going to make more money and pursue prosperity. The left side, I believe, would say something like this. And if I can say a very strange thing in your podcast today, imagine if socialism worked, right? An alternative universe. I would argue you still have the right to make all of your economic decisions, right? Even if you could argue that the government would make you better off by making those decisions for you. And that's what I characterize as the left side, living your life to your own standards, whether that's lifestyle or economics.
Does having George Washington's name on it make a college better, you think, or do you think that made any difference at all?
That's a fun question. I guess I don't know for certain what the answer is. if you are a youngster and you're enrolling in college for the first time, maybe it makes you think about the founding fathers. I certainly hope it doesn't make anyone think that slavery is okay, which it's not, but maybe it'll make you think once in a while you've got to commit to revolution, and sometimes that requires a little bit of violence. And it's admirable that people at one point in our nation's ancestry were willing to fight for it. What we would today recognize as libertarianism. The Constitution is a libertarian document, most accurately described. There's certainly an absence of libertarianism in the way our government has lived up to the aspirations of the Constitution. But, you know, there are things about George Washington that are worthy of admiration.
Yeah, definitely. And so you were teaching economics, and economics professors are generally better than, you know, college professors in other areas. I mean,
generally,
yeah,
not uniformly.
Yeah. So how did you go from, you know, running a business and being an economics professor to being a police officer in Florida? I mean, you probably got some interesting looks at, you know, so you moved from that to this. I mean, what motivated that change?
Yeah, there were some interesting looks. I had always been motivated. Well, I guess the big picture is I had always been motivated by public service, by public policy generally, but by public service particularly. It's one of the reasons why I considered myself lucky to have been able to spend a couple of years at the White House and some years working for other agencies and working in the public policy sphere on behalf of the banking industry as an advocate for freer markets in Washington for many years. But as far as public service goes, I had wanted to become a cop for much of my life. I had initially taken the entrance exam for the Washington, D.C., what they call the Metropolitan PD, Police Department, back in 89 or 90, and just decided I couldn't afford it, to be honest with you. It wasn't a great deal of money. Maybe that's not the most admirable way to make decisions if you're really committed to public service. Yeah. But I just figured I couldn't raise a family on it and put it off and put it off and put it off and put it off and put it off. And I was 49 in the police academy. So I worked from age 49 to 60 as a cop until about 18 or 19 months ago, and relocated. It was a great experience. You do learn that while most cops, at least in my observation, the fellas and gals that I knew, most cops are registered Republicans, they do have a certain libertarian leaning. And it was funny to come upon it. They wouldn't, in the main, agree with much of my police reform platform, although some I'm beginning to talk a few into it. But they're very skeptical of the war on drugs, many of them, right? And think about this, Chris. We all love to be mad at our boss, right? We all figure, oh, you know, the organization that I work for makes mistakes, and they, you know, have some dumb leadership, and they make rules for us to live by that they don't understand the implications of. You know, all of that. When you're a cop, the way that plays out is, man, a lot of this legislation in the criminal statute is stupid. And man, the city's asking us to do some really dumb things. So it's funny to see the libertarian streak in so many police officers come out, because that's when you're ready and waiting as a registered libertarian to say, you get it, you know? and so a lot of cops, you know, they have that streak.
Well,
so
I also suspect they probably hate to fill out reports and all this stuff. They probably don't enjoy the red tape aspect.
Well, doesn't everybody? I mean, everybody hates to fill out reports, and of course, a big part of police work is doing that. And some of it is, I mean, there's just no getting around that. You know, a lot of stuff does have to be documented, and then a lot of it is just, you know, bureaucratic, governmental. Butt covering and silliness. So yeah, you're absolutely right about that.
And usually, you know, you have to take a test, but don't you usually also have to take a physical to become a police officer and some other things like that? I mean,
oh yeah,
how does that process work? I mean, you know, if you're deaf, you're probably not going to be a police officer. have bad vision, you probably won't be a police officer. I mean, it's probably not as stringent as the military, but
no, it's arguably more stringent in the sense that no, you don't have to be under 35, obviously, but you do have to be able to perform a number of physical tasks. You have to go through an obstacle course and be able to run at a certain pace and things like this. I was very lucky that I was naturally healthy, but I was also in good physical condition. As an oddity, and this is going to sound like I'm bragging, but the truth of the matter is, I want you to consider what it implies for the rest of my cohort. Of the 33 of us in my class, I won easily the physical fitness award, and it was not age adjusted. I want that to sink in. So,
and this was what year when you went to the police academy?
2010.
Yeah.
And I think it speaks volumes of the extent to which, young Americans get out of shape and have to get back to their credit. They were able to whip themselves into shape over the 6 months or so of the police academy. So that's good. But being 49, I figured I better be in shape on the way in. And maybe I overshot the target. But as you might imagine, there were a number of folks who were skeptical about recruiting a 49-year-old. 50% of my class had at least one parent younger than I was, to put things in perspective. But I do believe that being older helped a great deal. It helps deal with some of the stress. It helps deal with some of the stressful situations. It helps in terms of dealing with families. Having raised a couple of teenagers myself already, I could relate to what some of the parents were going through. So that helps a lot. I'm always encouraged when police departments try to handle folks with a little bit of life experience. Obviously, you can't go around hiring 45-year-olds and keep them around for 25 years, but you can avoid hiring 19 and 20 and 21-year-olds. And I'm a big advocate for waiting until folks are in their mid-20s to become police officers, because there's a great deal of discretion in the work of a police officer that I did not appreciate until going to work for the police department. I did not realize the extent to which you have so much influence over how any particular case might go. And that's a big responsibility. One might argue it's too much responsibility, right? Yes. And we all see, videos of how it goes most wrong, but never mind the melodramatic catastrophes that we see sometimes in video. Just, everyday blocking and tackling, the nuts and bolts of the job, it's best performed by a mature adult.
Yeah, there's definitely some truth to that. The things that you get from life experience that help. One question I've been dying to ask you is, do you think any movies or TV, what portrays police officers accurately, or do any of them portray police officers accurately, or is it all just completely wrong?
It's my experience that almost all of it is completely wrong, in the sense that it's very difficult to depict a couple of things about police work that were impressed upon me in my way in that I just had no appreciation for. One of them is the extent to which the police academy instills in or at least tries to instill in everyone, a sense of fear. They teach you to take care of yourself above and beyond your obligation to take care of anyone else, which I think is just flat wrong. It's probably the biggest #1 problem I have with police training, and tries to instill a sense of fear that, always be alert and on the lookout. I get that. That's hard to argue with, I suppose, but it's with a sense of you're never more than, 30 seconds away from someone potentially trying to kill you. And I don't mean to say that that's impossible, right? So don't mishear me. But you can't be sufficiently sensitive, in my view. It's very difficult to be sufficiently sensitive to the priorities, the safety, indeed the lives of other people for whom you are occasionally responsible if you're always worrying about number one. You get my point.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something that does not come through on television. It does not come through in the movies. And it doesn't come through typically when you meet officers. You know, officers always present themselves as collected. They're trained to present themselves as under control and indeed willing to control you and willing to control the scene. You know, that's part of the training, of course, which is in some cases necessary and in some cases a little weird. And so you don't see that come through, but that's a big element. That's really a shame. The other thing that I think doesn't come through in TV and movies, because it's just hard to be sufficiently nuanced, is what you and I were talking about before, the extent to which officers have skepticism about so many of either the laws that they're enforcing or the rules that they're following. You know, there's big gray areas where, you know, you might not fully enforce certain things, as well as those cases where you're pissy and your boss knuckles you under and you have to do something you don't feel like doing. I don't think that ever gets portrayed on TV.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, and sometimes if it does get portrayed, it gets portrayed.
Yeah, you're probably right.
I mean, like Eddie Murphy in the Beverly Hills Cop movies when he's fighting with his supervisor or something like that. It's really hard to say. So is there anything out there that comes close to getting it right or not?
The things that get it right, I think, are too dramatic. In other words, the ones that dramatically portray the difficulty of wrestling with certain situations make it sound like it's a dramatic event every day. And it's not. You know, so sometimes they get that right, the wrestling with tough issues, but it's hard to portray the fact that day in and day out, the job can get fairly benign and boring. And that's a good shift, right? Sometimes your boss has to remind you, the object of the game is to make this job as boring as possible. Let's be clear. You know, you should not be out there entertaining yourself. That is not the point. Sometimes you have to respond to a lot of calls. When it's busy, you're going call to call to call to call to call. And at the end of a 12-hour shift, you know, you've had 20 calls. And a typical day, you'll have half of that. And in a good day, you can get bored. You know, you have 2 calls, a lunch, and a workout, and that's about it. But that's the object of the game. And I don't think that comes through on TV and the movies either.
Yeah, well, you know, boring stuff makes for boring television, and people won't watch it. But yes,
bingo.
You've got to focus on you've got to focus on the more.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, that's why so many shows, you know, you're investigating murder. It's not just about investigating, you know, somebody stealing $100 from the church.
Well, that's exactly right. And, you know, typically as an officer, you're not going to see more than a couple of murders in a year. And you're not going to, unless you're a homicide detective, you're not going to be intimately involved more than, you know, once, hopefully, depending on your town, in the ratio of murders to police officers. But that ratio should be set up where, you know, each officer doesn't really get too involved with a murder more than once a year or so, depending on your level of involvement. Where I worked in the south end of Broward County, it would go in waves.
Yeah. You
know, you could go a year or two and not be involved with a homicide. And then, you know, you find yourself on 6 scenes in 1 year. Maybe it's only to protect a perimeter, and sometimes it's pretty nasty. But it's healthiest not to expose officers to too much redundant violence over and over again, it does tend to weigh on you. 10 years is enough.
Yes. So you were in Broward County, Florida, and that's Fort Lauderdale, right?
That's right. Fort Lauderdale is the county seat. The county is stuck between Palm Beach County and Dade County.
Yeah.
So that's just one huge metropolitan area going from Miami to Palm Beach.
Yeah, I think it's about 100 miles of continuous city, and it's all got. So you live in Virginia now. So
yeah, it's wonderful. I live out in the middle of nowhere. We have a terrific Libertarian Party. By the way, we have a terrific Libertarian Party in Florida too. It was a real privilege to work with those people. In Broward County, we had a very robust group. Terrific leadership down there, really grew the party, and it was a joy to work with them, especially when I was running for Congress. But here in Virginia, we went through a little bit of mashugana with some folks tried to vote our party out of existence. And I was very grateful for a handful of individuals who really stepped up to the plate and handled the legality, the logistics, put a new convention together, a new leadership team. And now I would argue that we have a group that is as talented and as fun as any group in the United States. I would stand them up against anybody and expect them to compare quite favorably.
That's great. So you've run, what offices have you run for?
I have run for Congress. I ran for Congress in Florida's District 20 back in 21, 22. It crossed over December 31st.
Okay.
It was a special election in one of the bluest districts in the United States. And so the Democrat who won the primary is the presumed congressperson-elect, presumably. And indeed, the media treated her that way. It was really disgusting. She started flying up to Washington to have meetings with Nancy Pelosi, all just because she won the Democratic primary. She was, for all practical purposes, installed. She was picking out drapery colors for the congressional office. So we didn't get any media attention after the primaries, but we were able to make our case. A lot of Walmart hours, right? You're passing out literature, a lot of knocking on doors, a lot of phone calls, interviews on the radio and stuff like that. So it was a very rewarding and simultaneously frustrating process. But I would recommend it to all your listeners. Run for office. It's a hoot, as long as you have the right attitude. As long as you don't get it in your head that you're going to start, beating up Republicans and Democrats and taking these seats so easily. If you view it as a long-term prospect, you can have a good time.
Any other times you've run for office, or?
No, I've always been a public servant, unelected.
Okay. Yeah. That's cool. So what are some of your most passionate issues right now, or the most important issues you think right now?
Well, I do talk a lot about criminal justice reform. We touched on that. And a lot of that means changing police culture, getting rid of the war on drugs, of course, but changing police culture. And the way you start at that is getting rid of things like qualified immunity and imposing a requirement for officers to carry their own liability insurance, and get communities more involved, get police culture more aligned with the values of our society. That's something I spent a lot of time talking about. Yeah. The other things, having been an economist, I spent a lot of time talking about monetary policy. I do believe it's important that we end the Fed. I'm not one of those guys that stands out of the balcony and just bays at the moon saying, end the Fed, end the Fed. I've got a plan for how to do that. I understand why it's important. I understand that it's not something that happens overnight, even with the Libertarian administration. You've got to replace its leadership and then replace its policies one by one, shrink it down, and then move legislation to replace it lock, stock, and barrel. And that can be done. People don't realize it can be done in a way that not only protects our currency and protects our reserve status for American currency, but actually hardens that currency, protects it further, makes it better, especially in the long run. So that's something I spend a lot of time talking about. I also talk about fiscal responsibility. Having been with the White House Office of Management and Budget, I understand the imperative of slowing down the scale and scope of government. Capping spending is a big one. As Milton Friedman taught us, that's from which all bad things flow. It's the overspending that drives the debt, the taxation, and the monetization by the Fed. So that's a very important set of topics. Then the fourth one that I spend a lot of time talking about, and I think that this is likely the number one issue on the other side of the nomination in the general election cycle. I'll be talking a lot about anti-war, because I believe that Americans are more open than ever before to an anti-war message, and they're not going to get that from Republicans or Democrats. That is clear. I think one of the reasons Americans are so ready for that is because it's time for America to admit that on a strategic level, we're not good at it. On a tactical level, we're stellar, right? We're good at killing, blowing things up, moving material, moving people. We're good at opening sea lanes. We're good at protecting them. We're good at taking ground. We're good at protecting facilities and destroying facilities. We're good at all the tactical stuff. But there are not examples out there to which the American public would point and say, notwithstanding the billions it cost, or in the case of Iraq and Afghanistan, trillions that it cost, notwithstanding the lives lost, in those cases, the thousands of lives lost, and I hasten to add the many hundreds of thousands of lives lost abroad. Notwithstanding all that, I'm glad we did it. That was a good idea. There just aren't examples that the American public would point to and say that. And so I think that people are ready to finally admit that as a strategic matter, as far as pursuing objectives that are in our interest, we're not good at it. We need to cut it out. We need to stop trying to project power for no other darn good reason than to project military hegemony. We need to start, spending less and stop getting us into these alliances that oblige us to do stupid things, because some of the stupid things we do are short run, bad ideas, and some of them are long-term bad ideas. For example, we're working on a bad idea in Taiwan right now, and we need to reverse course, lickety split, or I'm afraid that in the long run, we're going to get ourselves boxed into positions in which some Democrat or some Republican really causes some serious long-term existential damage. That's not a risk we want to be running.
There's a lot of problems out there. Who were you working when you were at some of these offices in the District of Criminals? Whom were you working with? Anybody we might know? And was that during Reagan's time or?
I didn't know if you meant as a cop, who are the criminals, or when I was with the White House, who are the criminals?
District of Criminals, as in D.C., is Washington D.C.
That group of criminals. At the Office of Management and Budget, my boss was Richard Darman, who some of your viewers with gray hair might remember. He was a dark character and all about bringing power to himself. And his boss was George Herbert Walker Bush, the elder Bush. He's the one with the no new taxes pledge.
Yes.
He was a one-term president. I went to work for the banking industry. I was an advocate for free markets for quite a few years before a buddy of mine and I went into business for ourselves. And we had a very successful entrepreneurial run in the business of educating financial services professionals and providing events and experiences and doing some strategic consulting for certain financial institutions as well. So those were the days. Yeah, those were the criminals in power at the time. Bill Clinton was president for 8 of the years that I was there. Monica Lewinsky's attorney's office was downstairs from my office. So that was difficult to get in the door once in a while when all that was happening over a few-week period. And then, of course, George W. Bush came into power in 2000, and I moved to Florida soon after that.
Yeah. That would have been around the time the World Trade Center happened?
Well, that's exactly right. I was in Washington when the planes hit New York. And by the way, when one of the planes hit the Pentagon a few miles from my office, and that was a very discouraging day, of course. Anyone who can remember that remembers that feeling of a little bit of bewilderment, a little bit of fear, and a whole lot of just being discouraged about the way the world was progressing. We can all argue about the extent to which the United States foreign policy was a contributing factor in that. I will not tolerate anyone arguing that it was zero, right? There are lots of factors that go into that, but however you pull that apart, it's very, very discouraging. I don't think that we've seen anywhere near the last of such events. I believe that they're very likely on the horizon. And I believe for some of the same factors that drove that, our foreign policy still stinks. There are still people angry at the United States for reasonable reasons and for unreasonable reasons. And that's a dangerous mix.
Did you have any connections at, say, Cato Institute or Heritage Foundation or American Enterprise Institute or CEI or any of those organizations back then?
Not formally. I used to, well, I shouldn't say not completely formally. Yeah, you know, as an economist, I spent a lot of time at AEI lectures and getting to know those people, because AEI did a good job of running what they called a shadow regulatory commission, which is a group of economists. I was not a member of the group, but I worked with a couple of those guys, both in terms of providing them with information and using their information. As you know, a big part of my job was to interact with the regulatory authorities in Washington. When Greenspan was chairman of the Fed, for example, I spent a lot of time interacting with the Treasury Department, both the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency and the rest of the Treasury Department. I spent a great deal of time interacting with the FDIC. So that was a big part of my job. And so, yeah, I spent a significant amount of time with AEI. And then with Cato, that was back in the day when they were pushing for reform of Social Security. They still push for Social Security reform, but they were just launching it in those days. And I was a big believer in trying to, you know, push for that and see what kind of traction that we could get. The George W. Bush administration was an early believer. They quickly got discouraged and left it behind. But a lot of that came from Cato, and we formed a working group with the organization that I was with, Cato, and probably, I don't know, a half a dozen others. And we would pool resources for the development of materials, spreading the message in the regulatory agencies, as well as on Capitol Hill and with the administration. That was a big coalition, a big effort. A rewarding one in the sense that you were meeting people who had their heads in the right place, and a discouraging one in the sense that Washington is a difficult beast to tame. Yeah.
What books or thinkers have really influenced you in your political philosophy?
Big ones for me. I started out with Milton Friedman. I suppose a lot of young economists do. When I was really young, it's funny you made me think of this. My dad had gotten me to read Free to Choose was the name of it. Milton and Rose Friedman had together written Free to Choose. It had a very different voice than the rest of Milton Friedman stuff, so I believe that Rose probably wrote that and put Milton's name on it with her. That was it. I would encourage anyone who is not an economist but is interested in economics to pick that up, because even when I was 17, 18, 19, I was getting out of high school. I don't remember exactly which year. very, very accessible and covered a broad range. And he's, of course, he was a very libertarian thinker. I'm a big Thomas Sowell fan. You know, you don't have to pick up his basic economics. That's not a bad idea, by the way, to pick up his basic economics text. But he has written on everything from our society to schooling, racism. He is a very profound thinker coming from an extremely analytic point of view. So I encourage any of your viewers to pick up anything by him. And remember, Thomas Sowell is a Marine. If you remember that he grew up poor, grew up as a Marine, and started out as a socialist, and wound up one of our most profound libertarian thinkers and most influential economists, I think you'll enjoy it and have fun with it. So those people are important to me. You know, when I was younger, I used to read Hayek, of course. I think that everyone probably should read the basic texts. I think everyone ought to read a little bit of Mises himself. I think that's important because, you know, those guys, when you go back that many decades, what was really profound about what Mises and Hayek were saying, and I would credit Hayek to a certain extent. I have to give Mises a lot of credit because he helped train Hayek.
Yes.
And a lot of what Mises said was important on its own. I give Hayek a lot of credit for bringing together the two sides of libertarianism, suggesting that it's not possible for the government to run the world, to run the economy in an effective manner, and that it is the road to serfdom, that there is a loss of ethics and a loss of autonomy when a government tries to do so. And that's a very important concept, and it is in some ways one rubric, but it's two concepts that he, you know, sees as two sides of the same coin. And that's a very profound awakening, I believe, in the literature when he talks about that. So, you know, that's worth looking at. Mostly today, I don't have a lot of time to be reading, of course, because I'm campaigning, but mostly today I read topical stuff. You know, I don't read too many broad-based philosophical tomes. But I read recently, not RFK2, but his dad's summary of the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Mm-hmm.
That was really it's a very brief book. I think there's probably only 75 pages to it. I think it's probably called something like the 13 days or 13 Cuban days or something like this.
Yeah.
What I took out of that was how much the individual personalities can matter.
Yeah.
You know, he really credited his brother. Now, he's a homer. It is his brother. You're going to get the home turf view, especially because they were politically in lockstep and wed to each other. But having said that, he credits his brother with carefully negotiating a path through that when you weren't sure what the Russians were thinking. And you had to try to figure that out. Our communication's not always very good, especially all those now 60 years ago. And it was really interesting to think about how much attitude matters. It sends a shiver down my spine to think about some of our more recent presidents, you know, put in that position. I mean, if you really had to rely on one guy, right, to think through a complex situation and figure out how to communicate. In JFK's case, he had to, in effect, stare down his own cabinet that wanted him to take a very different path early on. And he stood by what he thought was the right thing to do and turned out to be a good strategy. Heaven knows. I mean, maybe it would have turned out okay if they had picked a different strategy. But can you imagine more recent presidents having either the general aptitude, the political will, the cojones to face down very senior people in your own administration? Or, you know, would you expect any president just to go along with his Republican or Democratic pack And that to me is a very scary proposition.
Yes, it definitely is. Speaking of the Cold War, obviously you were older than I was, but I was still very well aware of, watching the Berlin Wall come down, and, then 2 years later, the end of the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
Did you ever imagine that over 30 years later, Karl Marx would be more popular now?
I got to be honest. No.
I don't think any of us did.
Yeah, I really thought that Marxism and socialism, perhaps more generally, would be on the downslide. Now, I think you could argue that we've made a lot of progress worldwide in terms of lifting people out of poverty, empowering individuals, lifting people out of poverty, because basic principles of not what I would call democracy per se, but capitalism have been adopted and have been spread. Even in, you might argue that one of the big reasons China has made so much progress economically is because they have allowed certain decisions to be made by certain organizations at the organizational level, at the company level. They are not what you would call a true, free market capitalist nation by any stretch of anyone's imagination. But one of the things I find really discouraging is that in the United States, socialism seems to be more popular now than 25 years ago. And I find that really weird, but really discouraging, in the sense that what do you got to do to eradicate this stuff? When all empirical evidence suggests that it's dopey, is it just like a cool culture thing? All the kids are doing it, so come to the Marxist club at 5 o'clock and drink beer. I'm at a loss for explaining why it has the resurgence. I understand why it came into existence. I understand why it plays out. But this cool culture aspect to it, I find really discouraging.
Well, for one, it never died on the college campuses. We know that.
That's true. And so its resurgence there was just, lighting embers, gave it a head start. And that's where it shines most brightly. And I think that it's no coincidence that there is overlap between that and a lot of the woke culture that we see on college campuses today, particularly the cancel culture, the anti-First Amendment stuff that we find so strange. I think that goes hand in hand with wokeism, but more importantly, I think it goes hand in hand with Marxism.
Oh, definitely does. Who have you, who's run for office, or anybody in particular that you've really admired, that you really looked up to, that you thought was doing a lot of good things? Anybody who's in the LP who's run for office, or anybody outside of the LP who's run for office?
I admire a lot of LP people who have run for office. That is the truth, both at the local level and at the national level. Just as one example, Jim Turney, who used to be the chairman of the LNC, is on the city commission in Altamont Springs, Florida. And I admire that so much, because I know it's a pain in the ass. And I know that when he runs for office, he's able to spread the word, and then working inside the system, he's able to really make a difference. And I know him to be a great libertarian. So there's lots of examples like that. And people that run for office with absolutely no hope of winning, but do so just for the sake of using that vehicle to spread the message. Man, that really impresses me. There is no higher calling than running for office when you know you're going to get your butt kicked, and you do it anyway, and you do it with gusto. Those people have really influenced me a great deal. And that's the only reason I had the guts to run for Congress myself, is because I saw people do that. It does not impress me when people run for office because their families have a lot of money or they have a lot of money. It's, you know, it's fiscally easy for them to do. They grew up in a particular party and they have lots of friends in the party. And so there's an instant machine. That does not really impress me. What impresses me are these libertarians and people that are on our campaign. You know, people like LaMichael Wilson in Tennessee. You know, there are people out there. Dave Roberson in Texas, who's on our team.
Dave.
Yeah, you know, good people smart people who could be making more money if they were to spend this level of effort doing something else more selfish. And they dedicate their talents to spreading our message. That I find really inspirational, really courageous stuff. At the national level, I think you've got to find glimmers of hope on a issue by issue basis. So, for example, 89% of the stuff that Tulsi Gabbard says I find statist and off-putting. But when she is candid about how dopey our military and interventionist policies have been,
yes,
I really appreciate that a lot. I think that she speaks with credibility on these issues, and I'm a big listener. When, you know, when I was growing up a Republican, the folks that impressed me, for example, were people like Jack Kemp, who is a big believer in pro-growth policies of getting government out of the way in a regulatory sense as well as in a taxation sense. But Jack was one of those guys who was able to communicate how much better your life can be and your community can be without having the government involved with it. And so those are the kinds of people that I have followed along ever since, you know, over the past 30 years. But it's few and far between. You know, the economists that are pro-growth, that talk about ending the Fed, that impresses me a great deal.
Yeah. Jack Kemp ran as a VP candidate with Robert Dole in '96.
Yeah, that's going back. Your memory is excellent. Yeah. I thought Jack was a really good guy. I miss him.
Yeah, I haven't heard that name in a long time. So
I figured you didn't. That was an oldie but goodie.
Yeah, well, I mean, it might have helped too that he'd been a football player. You know, I don't know if that helps. I think that probably does help because it gets you some notoriety and you learn about dealing with the press and things like that. But it's certainly evolved.
Well, it does. The other thing it does, I think, is it steels you to be a little bit more independent.
Yeah,
you know, his identity didn't come from being a politician. You know, he didn't need to feel like everybody in the Republican Party was on his side. He could just speak more honestly about how he felt about things. In that sense, I really do. I don't agree with the two people on a lot of things that I'm about to mention, but I'll mention them anyway because I really appreciate what it is they're doing. I do appreciate RFK Jr.'s stance on war. I appreciate some of his criticisms, for example, about the vaccine mandates. I'm heavily against the vaccine mandate regimes that we've had, and going forward, I think that they're just awful, but important lessons that we need to learn, that the government now thinks it can do damn near anything and with your body. So I appreciate him standing up against that. At his core, what discourages me is that at his core, RFK2 is a guy he's a government guy. He's a pro-good government guy. He wants to make government work better. And you see that in his environmental policies. He doesn't talk about eradicating environmental policy. He talks about making it better. I got a problem with that. But anyway, I do appreciate his anti-war position. So I like that he's in it. And if he can push the Democratic Party in a better direction, then that's all good. I'm not necessarily terribly optimistic for him, but I'm rooting for him in that regard. The other guy that impresses me a little bit is Ramaswamy.
Vivek.
Yeah. He has a little bit of a libertarian tendency to him in terms of his economic policy. But I do believe that he is so steeped in Republican crap that it's hard for him to see over the edge. And it makes me wonder which one he's faking. You know, is he faking the libertarian economic position because he feels like it gets him some populist cred and distinguishes him from Trump, both of which are true and not necessarily bad things, but it could be disingenuous? Or is he faking the Republican America First, it's all about the culture side of his campaign that gives me some heebie-jeebies? But we'll see, I suppose, over time. Maybe not necessarily anytime soon, but I think people's true character comes out eventually, and he'll live up to his true self. I just don't think he is quite yet.
Yeah, I'm a little worried when Vivek talks about, going down, basically invading Mexico to go after the drug cartels instead of just legalizing drugs. That just drives me nuts. Yeah. That reminds me. What percentage of cops would you say favor ending the war on drugs?
That's a great question.
Or at least minimize, or at least maybe de-escalating the war on drugs.
Yeah, and I think that those are two big that's worth making.
I mean, were you involved with LEAP, for example, law enforcement against prohibition, those groups?
I have met some of those guys. I had submitted a letter that they didn't publish. But having said that, I do admire those guys a lot. And I think that there is definitely a leaning. I would go, look, it changes over time. It's a moving target, right?
Yeah.
So when I started police work 13 years ago, I would say the majority didn't buy into a de-escalation, but I would say optimistically a majority would today buy into a de-escalation, and a significant minority would talk about ending the war on drugs, talk about legalization, and not just marijuana. I would say the vast majority of cops are all for fully legalizing marijuana. But I would say a big minority would be in favor of legalizing the rest of the drug world. At the very least, I'm going to go 50-50 on this one. Legalizing drugs that are not addictive. I do believe that politically speaking, that's the first step. The first step is going to be if the government can't prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that it's addictive, then you really don't even have an argument that I think Americans would accept. And once Americans get comfortable with a de-escalation and then a decriminalization of drugs that are not addictive, then we go after the other piece, because I believe the war on drugs is really counterproductive. I performed CPR on a lot of people who were going through an overdose, and those are because of black markets. It's not because we don't have enough policing. It's because the black markets are so dangerous. They're deadly.
Yeah. And you hear about meth overdoses and stuff like that. I mean, in certainly some areas, that's what cops do, is they get called, and I guess they got to give people like shots now too, that basically
the Narcan or the nasal.
Yeah,
it's not someone in your
definitely a crisis. It's not something you said, I'm a cop, not an EMT. Also, just since on the same, what do police officers think about legalizing prostitution?
That's an interesting question. I guess I don't know for sure, but I can tell you that cops are not typically involved with fighting prostitution. So I suppose most cops would say they haven't been forced to think about it.
Okay.
Cops are mostly motivated, certainly in the beginning of your career. You want to, I'm going to say this in a libertarian way, but probably then I'll say it in a Republican way. Most cops are motivated to protect your rights. That's protecting your rights mostly from bad people that want to take your rights away. But the libertarian angle is that after you've been in the business for a while, you realize you also have to protect people from the government. And good cops get that and do that. How a Republicans would say that is cops become cops because they want to stop bad guys. They want to fight crime.
Yeah.
And so when you say, stop doing what you're doing and you're going to go on this detail and you're going to work at stopping prostitution, that's a weird thing to ask a cop to do. You know, like, why? You know, okay. And that's what gets cops thinking about whether it's just absolutely a waste of time. And then, of course, the aspect that gets really discouraging, especially if you have any libertarian leanings at all, and I would argue that most cops do, is the asset forfeiture angle on all of this. With drugs, I never had to work as a drug cop. We had our own unit at the police department that focused on that. So I was able to sort of opt out of that. I was lucky. But officers who are involved with the war on drugs will tell you that all too often a motivating factor for a police department is to get involved because you're going to confiscate assets that can either be liquidated and used for money to fund the police department, or even assets that can be used in the form of boats and vehicles. Yeah. And that's really a shame. You're really going to, if you have any libertarian tendency at all, that's going to discourage you. And when it comes to battling sex-related, what we call crimes, which aren't, right? When battling prostitution, there's a lot of that because there's cars that get forfeited. And that's really disgusting. Yeah, that's really disgusting.
Yeah, also, I didn't ask you. I assume you also would advocate for getting rid of no-knock raids.
Yeah, and that's an easy sell to a lot of cops because it's so dangerous.
Yeah, and
if you told a police department, well, we stopped doing it at our police department, and I don't remember anyone saying anything but, that's probably okay. That was dangerous stuff.
Yeah, I mean, you just announce yourself, hey, this is the police department. What do you think is the biggest mistake people make when they interact with police officers?
Not realizing.
I have a libertarian audience. I want to tell people how should we interact with cops?
The same way you would interact with someone who you trust to be on your side. Now, that's not to say you should trust cops to always be on your side. Don't mishear me. But I do believe that's how you should treat them, because bear in mind that so often cops are fearful. Someone who's done it for a long time, less so, but there are plenty of young officers who have a little bit of fear. Imagine approaching your vehicle in the dark at nighttime. They don't know what's what. Exactly. They've been trained to fear. There's naturally a little bit of fear, but now they've been trained to fear. Yeah. So my advice is don't spook them, right? Don't scare them. Be compliant. Understand that 99 times out of 100, they want to do the right thing. Yeah. Right. Now, there is that 1 in 100, and I appreciate that. I'm not trying to suggest that that's not important, but 99 times out of 100, they want to do the right thing. And most of the things that cops do wrong are out of fear. Yeah. Fear and, things moving too quickly and they get out of hand and dumb mistakes are made.
Yeah. Don't make sudden moves. Keep your hands visible. If you're in the car, hands on the wheel. It's
that sort of thing.
And probably, don't get too close. I mean, maybe stay 7 or 8 feet away if you're on the street. I certainly, I certainly will go up and ask a police officer, say, hey, I'm looking for this restaurant. Can you tell me where it is? Because police officers are good people to ask for directions. They know where everything is,
Of course.
Yeah.
And, do it politely. You're probably okay with that. Yeah. They not only are they very good at directions, They're also very good at knowing the best value for the buck at lunch. Those are the two things that cops are really good at.
Actually, they're probably not strictly allowed to do that, but yeah, but I can imagine police officer would be good. They'd be good for restaurant recommendations. Where's their good food? I never thought.
Yeah, not at the high end. You know, if you're taking your wife to a 4-star for your anniversary, you probably don't want to ask a cop. But
they're going to know where where the best tacos are, or the best barbecue or something like that.
In South Florida, I was a taco expert.
Yeah.
They can also tell you what's open at 2 a.m.
That's true too. Yeah. I won't ask about donuts though. I don't know where that.
Is today Donut Day or tomorrow? Yeah. When is Donut Day?
I don't know.
National Donut Day is coming up. I don't know if it's tomorrow or the next day.
Yeah.
I'm sure that'll be a good day for cops.
Yeah. Yeah. So what else? Yeah. So yeah, it's certainly been
the big thing for us is to push monetary reform and fiscal policy reform. I would encourage your viewers to check out our websites. You can see our platform at goldnewdeal.org.
Yeah.
Don't go to goldnewdeal.com because they'll try to sell you something.
Goldnewdeal.org, yes.
Which is not a bad. I'm not against buying gold. That's probably a good idea. It's just the wrong website. So go to goldnewdeal.org and you'll see our platform, which I think you'll see is the most transformative collection of policies that I believe is necessary to differentiate us from Republicans and Democrats on the other side of the nomination.
I realize as a president you can't do that much for this, but what are the best ways to encourage good police work?
I think one is better accountability. So there's that whole bucket that I was referring to earlier of getting rid of qualified immunity, imposing an insurance requirement, getting your local politicians involved is the other bucket of stuff. Politicians do a horrible job of holding police departments accountable. They're so often politically captured, which is a problem because the police unions can be quite powerful locally in terms of local elected officials. That's a real problem. Politicians have such a huge opportunity that they don't realize because they don't have the skill set and they don't understand police work. But if a local mayor, for example, were to say, and this is my favorite speech I've never heard. If a local mayor would say, you know what? I'm done negotiating with you people over a 3% raise or a 2% raise or a 1% raise. I'll give you a 5% raise, right? I'll give you a $10,000 raise. I'm done with nickel and diming this because that's a lot of crap.
Yeah.
You want to make more money. And to be honest, I want to pay you more money. But here's how it's going to go down. I want to be involved in hiring, training, disciplining, and most important, who gets promoted and who doesn't. And I reserve the right to fire your ass if I don't like the way you part your hair one day, just because I'm in a bad mood. It's going to be like any other business in the United States.
Yeah.
I'm going to pay the good ones more. I'm going to fire the crappy ones. If you're mediocre, maybe you can hang on, but you're not going to get the raises I'm going to give to the really stellar performers. And I'm going to decide what a stellar performer is. I'm not just going to be hand in hand with the chief of police. I'm going to be involved.
Yeah.
And I'm going to get the commission involved and our local leaders involved because I want our community's values simpatico with the police department's values. Now, if a mayor stands up and makes that speech and says, if you can hear my voice anywhere in America, you want to be a cop, you want to make $100,000 to start with the opportunity to make real money over time. But understand, I'm going to hold you accountable and I'm going to fire you if you stink. Give me a call. Here's my phone number. Join my police department. You're going to get a lot of people that takes you up on that offer. And it might be a slightly different group than you're getting now. And I think that that's probably a good thing.
Yeah. Well, what do you think can be done to reduce some of these shootings? And I will especially admit there is almost no excuse ever for shooting a dog. You can use pepper spray or whatever.
The reason dogs get shot so often, I'm not excusing it, I'm only explaining it. Let me be clear. The reason dogs get shot so often is the no-knock warrants.
Yeah.
Because you burst through the door and cops are trained to be fearful. You burst through the door and you're looking for threats. And the first thing you see is a dog that's not going to be compliant, because dogs don't comply.
And they're territorial. Yes.
And they're territorial. And they should be. That's their job. That's their role. That's their makeup, right?
Yes.
And so, the thing comes at you in the dark with teeth. The second guy through the door is supposed to put the dog down. That's how it happens. And so one of the benefits of getting rid of no-knock warrants is, we'll save a lot of humans, but we'll save a whole lot of pets.
Yeah, that's always a one for me. You pepper spray, or unless the dog is attacking a child, that is one exception in my view, but that's really the only one.
I agree. It's unfortunate when it has to happen, but the vast majority of time is when someone feels threatened because they shouldn't be in the home in the first place.
But I've also unfortunately read stories of which police officers have de-escalated things without shooting, and then they got reprimanded for that.
Yeah, that is disturbing. As a matter of fact, I'm well aware of a case in mind myself. That comes from the training that you have to take care of yourself.
Yeah.
Right. And the police culture is so tight around that concept that it's like any other government policy. We have to maintain it 100%, because if we let it slide to 90%, the whole house of cards falls apart. Yeah, officers are sometimes reprimanded, not for not shooting per se, but for de-escalating in a way that did not, in the supervisor's view, maintain enough security and control. That's what it's all about, is they don't want officers to compromise their control, because it is believed that is the path to compromising security, which is the path to compromising safety. So that's how that plays out. I believe that police training has to be adjusted. No question about it. I believe that ever since I went through it myself. And sometimes it's relatively subtle. I'm not talking about throwing out safety training, right? Sometimes it's subtle, but it is important. Nor do I think that there's a silver bullet. I don't think we're going to get to a point where, a cop shoots someone when it wasn't absolutely necessary only once every 10 years in America. That's a good thing to shoot for, so to speak. Pardon my accidental pun. But I don't think we're going to, we're likely to get all that far. But we can make a lot of improvement over where we are now.
Yeah, well, I think, if we could just get on par with the rest of the English-speaking world, I think that would be an accomplishment, but
it would be. And a big piece of that is getting rid of the war on drugs and getting rid of these black markets that create so much violence in the first place.
Certainly. And
were it not for these black markets, you wouldn't have armed gangs of teenagers roaming through our urban areas that create so many of the opportunities for things to go wrong. I'm not trying to excuse either side. I'm not trying to excuse the bad behavior on part of the gangs. I'm not trying to excuse the bad behavior on the part of the government for instituting these black markets. I'm not trying to excuse the bad behavior of the cops that shoot when they don't need to. But when you combine all, the police culture that we have today with these black markets that incentivize young people to become criminals and then to carry, because of turf wars and because of the transactions they're involved with, it's a recipe for hazard.
Yeah, I think another problem is also this a mentality of circling the wagons. I mean, when Dan White shot Harvey Milk, and he actually was no longer a police officer at the time, but all of the police officers were just talking about, oh, Dan is just so misunderstood, or
right.
They all went out and defended him. I said, he shot a guy,
right.
just went in and shot the guy. I mean, and all these police officers were defending him. It's like, what's going on here? I mean,
yeah, I think that's the wrong strategic move.
Yeah.
As cops, I think that we need to do a better job of saying that's behavior that we won't tolerate. Yeah. Look, the Harvey Milk case is a stark example. That's an exaggerated example, right?
Oh, yeah.
But even more subtle examples are out there, and we need to get good at saying that's bad police work. We're not going to tolerate that. Yeah. And unions are a major roadblock keeping us from moving police culture in the right direction in this sense, because they do make it very difficult to hold police officers accountable. And of course, police officers naturally rally the wagons a little bit, as you said, because they believe that they are misunderstood by the rest of society. There is a little bit of truth to that, but it is also true that some of that comes from the fact that the community's values are not being projected through the police department, and the community is not sufficiently involved with the training and the hiring of police officers. If there was more involvement, there would be more trust on both sides.
Yeah. What do you think about SWAT teams? Just get rid of those altogether?
Or? If you get rid of the no-knock warrants, you can get rid of most of that. Even the knock warrants, you can get rid of, and you get rid of most of that. So most police departments could get rid of their SWAT teams and contract out to local sheriff's offices and things like that. You don't need it that often. It's a very expensive thing to maintain in terms of personnel time and training. There are times when you're going to need it.
Yeah.
There's just no getting around the fact that there are times when you have a barricaded subject, for example, and specific expertise and hazards to be avoided, right? Specific training is necessary, but it's nowhere near as often as it is used today. Well, and SWAT teams are used a lot less today than they were 5 years ago.
Oh, that's good to know. Yeah.
So we're going the right direction. In my view, we're going the right direction there.
Yeah. And I mean, you got to have specialized teams. Like you got to have a bomb squad, that knows how to defuse bombs and things like that,
But a lot of that you can have relatively centralized. You don't need one of those teams in every teeny tiny town in a rural community.
Yeah. I mean, Andy Griffith does, Sheriff Andy Taylor probably isn't going to know how to defuse a bomb, although he probably rarely, if ever, deals with that. But, it's just.
Well, that's right. Yeah. It's an expensive thing to maintain. You wouldn't want Mayberry to have a SWAT team on standby.
Yeah, but he might need to call somebody that says, hey, I need somebody here to come out here, but do you think part of the problem too is that a large number of police officers are ex-military, or what are the numbers on that, would you say?
I don't actually know the numbers on that. I know in my particular academy, it was about probably north of a third were ex-military. The good news about having military involvement is that there's a certain amount of discipline.
Yeah.
And so that's good. One of the things that we need to bear in mind is that discipline breaks down quickly, especially in the absence of supervision. And a lot of what we see go wrong, we all saw the Memphis videos last year. When things go wrong, it's so often a breakdown in discipline. There's no supervisory presence. Training is not maintained. Discipline falls apart. So I like the idea of having disciplined youngsters involved. You're right that there's a militaristic element sometimes that is not helpful. But it's been my personal observation. This is only anecdotal. I don't have data on this. But my personal observation has been that, how do I say this politely? The officers you would pick last are not in the military, are not formerly from the military.
Yeah, certainly that sounds, I wasn't sure how much that was, but I do know it seems to be there's a lot of military equipment that now is being given to police officers.
And that stuff is useless. We need to, I'm not a fan of that. No one is a fan of people having equipment and therefore looking for a way to use it, right? That's obviously to be avoided, but it's also a tremendous waste of money when a police department has to acquire it and then finds that it's not useful. There is a certain amount of stuff that, for example, the Army passes around because it's no longer useful to them. As an economist, I got to query whether it's really useless to you now, or is it just the fact that you covet the most recent model and that you want the extra bell or whistle and you're willing to spend any amount of the public's money to get it. I worry about that. So there's a pull aspect of the market I worry about, but there's also a push aspect of the market I worry about. The military wanting to get rid of some of this stuff so they can get better, more cool toys.
Yeah, and in some cases, they say they could give it to some of these foreign countries they want to, but I don't know why they're getting rid of it. But then again, why do we spend so much on the military to begin with?
Bingo.
Yeah. Have you looked at any? I know, for example, in some places they actually teach police officers to meditate. I think that was Thailand or Malaysia or something like that.
I have heard that. I have not seen that in the United States. Police departments that are on top of their game do tell police officers frequently that you have mental health services available to you. There are psychologists on call. The department, the city or the county or the state will pay for a certain amount of therapy. Those things are important. If you can head off a real problem, or at the very least identify a real problem early in the cycle, that's all good. Yeah. But no, I haven't seen firsthand as you described, the more Eastern ways of maintaining mental health. I haven't seen those played out in law enforcement setting yet.
I had a friend who was from Brazil, who had been a police officer in Brazil for 10 years, which is, and being a police officer in Brazil is probably a lot more dangerous than any place in America. But
it could be, depending on where it could be.
But I think he was in Sao Paulo. So
Sao Paulo is a huge, as you know, it's bigger than New York.
But he didn't have a positive opinion of American police officers, and I just thought that was kind of telling that he'd obviously.
That's really interesting. Why, that's someone I would love to sit down and chat with. I'd love to hear what his experience is, because Sao Paulo is a densely populated urban area.
Oh yeah. There's and if you haven't left America, you don't know what poverty looks like. But anyway.
Well, that's exactly right. When you see the poorest areas outside of and even inside of Rio de Janeiro, it can really be discouraging.
Yeah. So so obviously, what other, we talked about drugs, prostitution, anything else you really want to see get off the books? I mean, any of these other victimless crimes?
Well, those are the big ones. The other one that really bothers me a lot, where we're creating another black market, is at the border in terms of immigration from Mexico in particular. It's very I was down there for a couple of days. I met with Border Patrol. I met with local law enforcement. I met with ranchers who own property at the border. I was there with an attorney, a friend of mine who is familiar with a lot of these issues. I met with local libertarians, leadership. And one of the things that I came away with was what a true humanitarian crisis we have at the border. we are allowing people to come in because we can't shut it down, right? So we're criminalizing something, in effect, criminalizing something that culture is not ready to live without. And that's where black markets come from. And that's what makes it so dangerous. So you see these coyotes bringing people to the border, which is extremely dangerous. They become indentured servants. They hand them off to another human trafficker on the other side of the border, communicating by cell phone and walkie-talkie. And then these people are in real hazard. I'll let your viewers use your imagination how dangerous these situations are for these people. This is what I believe is the biggest thing that your politicians and your national media are not telling you. They are not telling you that this isn't just a political matter. This is a real human tragedy, and this needs to end. When I was at the White House, we could vet people in 90 minutes from a cold start. So this idea that we can't vet people through at the border, I find absolutely repugnant. I'm not a fan of using federal resources to do almost anything. But in this particular case, while we're in the midst of retiring officers from the Army, I believe that we need to send some personnel to the border to adjudicate these cases rapidly. Much more pro-immigration, much more pro-immigrant policy is what's needed there. Get people in, get them spread throughout the United States. I agree that communities should be frustrated with the idea that they're faced with having a disproportionate number of immigrants coming to their particular community for no good reason. You know, that's crap. And we need to close the border because not because we don't want these people to come through, but because we want them to come through safely. So the reason we need to close that border is to encourage people to come through the legal way and to speed that up. Hey, you know, don't come over that desert, over that river, across that mountain. Go to the gate. We're going to get you through in a day or something, you know, whatever it takes.
Exactly. Yeah.
But not this, you know, year-long stuff. We're going to get you through. We're not going to separate you from your family. There's no one who thinks that that's an acceptable idea, and get these people in. And by the way, don't be telling people they can't work. Tell them they have to work. My goodness. You should be telling them when someone asks, you know, am I allowed to work? You're not allowed not to work, mister. You better get to work. Yeah. That's why you're here.
You're going to create another black market, you know, and you know, also, when these people are illegal, they're less likely to report, to talk about, unsafe working conditions or, unsafe working conditions or, something that might, Angela McArdle pointed out that a lot of the illegal immigrants wanted to come out to the protests against the coronavirus restrictions, but they obviously didn't do that. And
nor would you if you were smart. Would you go seek a place where there's crowds and cops?
Yeah,
forget about it.
And this is not just an American thing too. I've heard stories, for example, of South Korean employers treating North Koreans very badly too. It's
it happens all over the place because so many places in the world really are skeptical about bringing immigrants.
Yeah,
and the truth of the matter is, it's not only part of American culture, but it defines America in many ways, and in a very positive sense. It's good for us economically. It's good for us culturally. It's good for us in terms of foreign policy. It's good for us in terms of maintaining our libertarian idealism. It's what America should be about.
Well, the war on drugs has certainly destabilized Mexico, and America has done a lot of other things to destabilize these other countries. To his credit, RFK2 pointed out that a lot of the destabilization of countries in the Middle East meant these immigrants ended up going to Europe because of the destabilization there. There's a lot of things. we go, it's like, you go burn down their house and then you're wondering why they're knocking on the door to come to your house. It's, well, you shouldn't have burned down their house in the first place.
Yeah. People in Washington don't seem to have a real handle on how one action leads to another, that there are reactions to your bad policy. It seems like a never ending tale of surprise over the reactions to your bad actions. It's really weird.
I guess you didn't see as much illegal immigration or something. Did you see that much in South Florida? Although, it's a little different in South Florida because
you have
the water. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and you did once in a while have someone show up in a raft. Not often, but it happens. You sometimes run into folks that don't have papers.
Yeah.
But as a local cop, that's not your shtick. So you can kind of dodge that a little bit.
You're probably dealing in some cases too with people who don't have papers, any kind of papers at all. I mean, people who may not have birth certificates, they may not have driver's license, they may not have anything that says who they are. I mean,
well, right, and that can be a problem. That can be a real problem because it's difficult to distinguish between someone who has no identification and someone who doesn't want to give you their identification.
Yeah.
That's a real challenge for law enforcement. And if they're suspected of a crime, sometimes it's very difficult to figure out what to do. Now, if you can, if you have probable cause to believe a crime has been committed, then you're just going to have to arrest them and write John Doe on there. Sometimes that happens. And sometimes you've got to walk away and, wait for evidence to turn up, because we don't arrest people for not having identification. Right.
Yeah. Cause I remember, when I lost my driver's license and I went into the office and I took my passport. I said, well, here's my passport. And of course that's good enough. They said, okay, so.
Yeah, that happens.
Yeah. But I kept my passport.
Chris, you asked good questions.
Yeah. I do my best to ask good questions. Yeah.
I really appreciate you asking questions about law enforcement. I appreciate you giving me the chance to talk about economics too. So I'm really grateful for having been on your show and being able to talk about the policies that we're putting out there. Thank you.
That's good. Yeah. I'm glad to have you on here. It was a great conversation. I definitely, I do try to keep this ideological. I don't know if how much I'm going to go into strategy or.
It's great that we were able to talk about policy. If people, in addition to you had asked me, what else we need people to know. In addition to going to goldnewdeal.org, people can read about the campaign if they want to at MikeTerMaat.com.
Yeah.
And reach out to me. My real email address is there. The real phone number is there. If you have any commentary, if you want to help with the campaign, we're taking volunteers now.
Yeah.
You can make a donation. If you got, that money in your pocket that's disrupting your walk, you can get rid of it on our website.
Yeah.
And you can just learn about it. Reach out to me. Let me know what your thoughts are.
Anybody else on your staff you want to give a shout out to? I mean, you mentioned David Robertson and you also mentioned that. Well, you mentioned Jim Turney, but that's TURNEY, but he's not on your staff. But
no, he's an advisor to our campaign. He's on our team, but he's not on our staff. A shout out to and a grateful one to Gabby Cordova, who arranged us to spend this afternoon together.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Who used to be an outreach director with the LNC. And of course, our campaign is run by Dennis Consorte, who has been running Larry Sharp campaigns in the past. And our social media guy, Evan Murphy, who's a very important part of our team. It is his 23rd birthday today. So happy birthday to Evan.
I don't think I know any of those people, but yeah, so.
Well, Dennis is the Larry Sharp guy and a very sharp guy, by the way, without the E in the end. Dennis is an important piece of our strategic thinking. So we're really glad to have Gabby and Dennis and the rest of the team.
Yeah, Larry, Larry's a good guy. I think Larry's one of those You know, I should have asked you too. What did you think? What were you doing during all the coronavirus business going on? Were you out there leading protests or?
Oh, well, yeah, with the Libertarians. I'll show you a video that we did of me standing on the scaffolding with the blowhorn and the goofy hat and the yellow T-shirt.
Okay,
yeah, we used to go to the beaches and pass out literature.
Oh yeah.
Stand on the street corners, hold up signs. So yeah, we had a good time with it, and I think you see over time that your message would, start to resonate with a lot of Americans. They started out more fearful than analytic, but they rolled around to our way of thinking. And so while I'm fearful that the government has it in their head now that they can do anything they want, I'm hopeful that the American public has learned that that's what the government is after, an element of control that we cannot cede to them. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, and thanks for everything, Chris. Thanks for
thank you very much.
Your time today. I'm really grateful.
Yeah. I'm Chris Baker. Please like my video, follow my video, follow my channel, subscribe to my channel, and certainly share it. Send any comments if you have. Also, buy my novel, Escape from the Village. Thank you, Mike ter Maat. I'm Chris Baker, and we are out.